a lot of these guys are going to go, I don't belong to SSPX. Well, that's a misnomer. You can't belong to SSPX. You can just be friendly to these kinds of groups, okay? So be careful, because there's kind of a smoke and mirrors going on. All these guys in the CIC, the Michael Matt, that whole spin, they all hate Israel.
Rabbi Singer. That's got a good ring to it, doesn't it? Rabbi Singer. Okay, Rabbi Singer, just kidding. One of the issues I'm hearing about more and more, and frankly being asked about constantly right now, is the reemergence of anti-Semitism within the segments of the Christian right. We're seeing the language of replacement theologies resurface, and it's being amplified by public figures and online influencers. What exactly is replacement theology? Where does it come from historically and theologically? Why is it reappearing now with such intensity? And why are we actually witnessing today? What are we actually witnessing today that makes this such a burning and dangerous issue?
Yeah, so this is a very, very serious issue. As it turns out, people are going, whoa, what's happening among Christians? I thought the evangelical Christians are Israel's best friends. What isn't it the conservative Christians that are the people that are more friendly, more Jew-friendly, and it's the progressives that we really have to worry about. Well, we're seeing a split in the right. Well, what's going on, and do we have to be concerned? You bet we have to be concerned. And replacement theology, what does that really mean? So as it turns out, until the 19th century, all Christians believed in replacement theology. All of them did, both Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant. All the reformers believed in replacement theology, whether it was Luther, Calvin, Bucer. It made no difference. They all did. Even the progenitors of the Reformation, John Wycliffe, he believed in it. He was a British theologian in the 14th century, most noted for translating the Bible into English. He didn't know Hebrew, he translated Latin Vulgate. The church fathers, all of them believed in replacement theology, a hard replacement theology. And they weren't crazy. They just relied on the Christian Bible. What does that mean? So all Christians believe that the Hebrew Bible is the Word of God, and they're keenly aware of promises made to the children of Israel. Now, often we think of the children of Israel as being chosen, like sort of we won the lottery. But it's quite clear when you read Tanakh, chosen for what? Well, it doesn't really mean they're chosen for security in our possessions and complete peace and we'll have no problems. Tanakh is very explicit about the very difficult challenges of the Jewish exile, but the role of the Jewish people is to be a light to the nations, and that's our mandate. And those Jews who have succeeded in carrying out that mandate are preserved in the covenant as per Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9. So just so you know, chapter 7, verse 9 explicitly states that those of the children of Israel who love God too are loyal to his mitzvot. They'll be preserved. All the other Jews will be lost among the nations of the world. And that's why we don't have the descendants of the earliest Christians, of Jews who rejected the oral Torah. They're all gone, which is very significant. But what's replacement theology? Replacement theology teaches that while it is true that the Jewish people, the physical seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were heirs to the promises, because the Jews rejected Jesus, did not believe in him, because they did the unimaginable crime, committed the unimaginable crime of killing Jesus. Now, they don't believe that physically the Jews killed Jesus. They believe the Romans did it. But if you read, and they're right, if you read what's called the Passion narrative, so if you read Mark 14:15, right? If you read John 18:19 as an example, if you read Matthew 27, if you just did that, you don't need any commentary. They're very easy to read. You would conclude, sure, Pontius Pilate ultimately is responsible for actually crucifying Jesus, and crucifixion was a uniquely a Roman form of execution. But what is abundantly clear, what is repeated, the refrain that comes up over and over again is Pontius Pilate didn't want to do it, and the Jews urged him, not only urged him, but demanded that he kill Jesus. And the later the gospel chronologically, Mark first, John last, the more anti-Jewish it is. And I want to rephrase that, the more responsible the Jews are guilty for killing Jesus, and the more the Roman Empire, and Pontius Pilate in particular, is exonerated for Jesus' death, to the point that when we get to John 19, verse 11, Jesus, in a lucid conversation with Pontius Pilate, just says to him straight away that you're not even responsible for this. It's the Jews. It's brackets. Those who gave me over to you, they're responsible. Matthew 27, in a sense, that's the passion narrative in the first gospel, in a sense, is more incendiary in that in Matthew 27, the Jews are urging Pontius Pilate to kill Jesus. Pontius Pilate is protesting completely, and he's saying, he literally is washing his hands of it, quite literally. I have nothing to, I'm innocent to this whole thing. Moreover, Matthew 27, which I think, in a sense, is more anti-Jewish than John 19, in a sense. Pontius Pilate's wife gets involved. It's the only cameo she makes in the entire New Testament. She had a dream about Jesus the night before, so it's Pontius Pilate and his non-Jewish wife going up against the hordes of Jews screaming, crucify him, and Pontius Pilate's going, don't you, why don't we crucify Barabbas and let Jesus go? I mean, it's really that much. And the Jews exclaim, this is the key point, that we take full responsibility for this, and let his blood be upon ourselves and our children, which means the Jews are culpable for Christ's crucifixion, not only that generation, but future generations of Jews. This is going to, that one passage, Matthew 27:25, is responsible for the death of untold numbers of Jewish people. The church fathers took this very seriously. So hard replacement theology would simply say that while the Jews were chosen, no doubt, but because of their unspeakable crimes, it's not that they just didn't believe in Jesus because they weren't persuaded. The Christian Bible characterizes the rejection of the Jews as being knowingly rejecting Jesus and knowing the truth all along, and setting up false witnesses in order to not only indict but convict Jesus of crimes that the Romans would see him responsible for insurrection. This is very important. And the Jews knew the truth the whole time, rejected him anyway, and therefore the Jews are the devil, and therefore, this is very critical in replacement theology, the church is the new Israel. This is also called covenant theology, replacement theology, or supersessionism. These words all mean the same thing, and therefore the church is the new Israel. The church is the heir to all the blessings originally given to the Jewish people, now have been transferred over to the church, and it is the body of believers. They are the new Israel. And people who believe in supersessionism are not, their hands are not empty, in that it's not like they don't have verses that would support this. They do, many of them. very, very famously, Romans chapter 2, verse 28 and 29, where Paul says in his letter, in his most influential letter, he says to the church in Rome, which he had not yet visited, that the people who are Jewish outwardly, circumcised outwardly, are not the real Jews, essentially is what he's saying. Now, as you know, Paul is we've talked about this before, is a highly mercurial, temperamental person. So his letters by nature are going back and forth. So in Romans, the very next chapter, Romans chapter 3, he's going to immediately go, is it not great to be a Jew? After all, they gave us the oracles of God. Okay, so that's the nature of Paul, very temperamental, highly mercurial, and also he was the kind of person that he was this to that and that to this, and depending who his audience was, he was someone who would pretend to be whatever he needed to be. So these are the kinds of passages that the church relies on, and Romans chapter 9 through 11. Now, this idea that the Jews are replaced by the church, this was called hard replacement theology. I'm going to explain soft replacement theology in a moment, but I want to stick with this, is only amplified by the church fathers who hated the Jews, and they all did. We can go to the earliest church fathers, Ignatius. He's famous for many, many reasons. He's the bishop of Antioch. He invents the word Catholic. He's responsible for introducing the idea that the Sabbath should be celebrated on Sunday. You have Tertullian, Irenaeus, they all, Origen, they all believe this way. The most revered of the church fathers, Augustine, he's a Latin church father who is venerated in the Roman Catholic Church. He's absolutely revered. His birthday is celebrated he's a saint in the Orthodox Church. He's held in even higher esteem in the Roman Catholic Church for reasons that are beyond the scope of this conversation. John Chrysostom, he's venerated in the Orthodox Church. That's the second largest Christian denomination. They pray to John Chrysostom. He was the Archbishop of Constantinople in the 4th and 5th century, basically the same time. What's very critical is that these people like John Chrysostom, Augustine, Cyril of Alexandria, they were all anti-Semites, but bear this in mind. These people, these church fathers, all lived after Constantine. They all lived after the Council of Milan. They all lived after Theodosius. What does that mean? They lived during a time when Christianity was the official religion of the Roman Empire. This is very, very critical. This is very, very important. Because anti-Jewishness, Melito, that's 2nd century, it's very early. Melito can write all kinds of just screeds against the Jews, which survive to this day. But Melito, Irenaeus, Ignatius, Tertullian, all these guys, Justin, it didn't matter what they said about Jews, because in prior to the Council of Nicaea, and very specifically prior to the Council of Milan, where Christianity becomes a licit religion. It's not official yet, it will be. Christianity was an illicit religion. It was the Roman Empire didn't recognize them, and sometimes Christians were persecuted. In fact, Constantine's predecessor, Diocletian, really persecuted Christians. In the first decade of the 4th century, Christians were persecuted more than in any other period in history. So the key point is, and Augustine is going to, Augustine was a prolific writer. His confessions, in his polemic against Manichaeism, in his very important work called The City of God. City of God is a polemic. It's his magnum opus in a sense, where he seeks to explain why. answering a lot of questions. The big question he's addressing, it's important for you to understand this, is why was Rome sacked in 410? If Rome becomes Christian in the 4th century, then why in 410 did God destroy Rome? Which a lot of people were saying, like, wait, we became Christian. How could Rome fall? So he's there to address that, and you could, from the name of the book, City of God, you can figure out what his response would be. But he's there to address the Jews. Why are the Jews still here? Like, if the Jews lost the covenant and have been replaced by the church, and the Jews, so here's a view which seizes the church, the way the church thinks, is that the Jews are preserved in order that everyone should see what it means to be a nation that killed Christ. This is very important to him. And the Jews must be kept in a ghetto, subservient, in a low state, but protected. Don't kill them, preserve them. He actually creates or assures that there should be Pope's Jews, Jews in Rome, that are preserved, that are, you can't, they didn't have the same rights as others, but you weren't allowed to kill them. And in fact, when the Nazis came on October 16th, 1943, when the Gestapo came to Rome to take away the Jews of Rome, right under the nose of Pius XII, even though none of them cared about the Jews, they're concerned with, but those are the Pope's Jews, they're supposed to be protected. And Pius XII just turned his back and could care less, take them away. But this is his view that the Jews are deliberately rejected by God and are preserved in a degraded state, and the church is the new Israel, and therefore the Jews are gone. They're not the true Jews any longer. And they are there just as a museum piece. So we should see the degraded state of the Jewish people, lest Christians try to harm them and so on. So this is real hard replacement theology. There's soft replacement theology. Soft replacement theology means like people who, let's say, Reformed Baptists or something like that. Now, the Protestants are sort of all over the place on this. So they're still Protestants that are Christian Zionists are rejected. But the sort of replacement theology just means that the Jews are not supposed to be in a degraded state. No one's supposed to harm them, blah, blah. They're not accursed today, but they're no longer chosen. And Israel means nothing. The state of Israel means nothing, has nothing to do with the Bible. Now, what happens is that in October 1958, specifically the 9th day, Pius XII, Hitler's pope, who reigned for 19 years, who was the author of the agreement between the Vatican and the Third Reich when Hitler comes to power. He wasn't pope when Hitler rose to power in 1933. But he was the one who literally forms a concordat, a diplomatic agreement between the Vatican and the Third Reich. This is mind-blowing. So this is a total nightmare. Pius XII, he dies on October 9th, 1958. Pope John the 23rd is selected on October 20th, 1958, and he's there really to deal with the problem that the church has become associated with the Nazis. You have no idea how bad this was. So I told you on October 16th, it was a Sabbath, that the Gestapo came in and took all the Jews of Rome. 1,259 Jews were taken. They were all killed with the exception of 16. There were many Catholics in Rome that hid Jewish children. There were Jewish. This is so bad. This is dark. So if you're not in the mood for dark, watch something else. There were Jewish families that gave their children over to Christian families to watch them. And many of them, as you can imagine, baptized these little kids. And then when the families came back, when members of the family came back to retrieve their children, Pius XII made an edict that no child that had been baptized could be given back to the families of Jews who are not Christians. Don't ask. This is horrible. In the Vatican itself, a rat line is created to protect Nazis, give them new identities so they can flee to places like South America. It's so diabolic, you can't imagine. Now, what happens is this is very, very critical because you're asking about what's going on now. The Vatican has a way of bringing in a new leader, a new pontiff, who would deal with a crisis and scandal in the church. And this was the big scandal. Pius XII, Hitler's Pope. We need a guy to come in to lead the church who very much was not Hitler's Pope. And they chose John the 23rd. And John the 23rd generally was a philo-Semite. He liked Jews. He saved Jews during the Holocaust. And he was deliberately brought in order to mask this whole thing. And they're doing the same thing. This is the way the Vatican does it. So they got scandals with pedophilia and all that. Not a problem. Let's bring in some nice guy, jolly fellow from Argentina. Let's bring in an American guy who has no connection at all with the scandal. That's how they deal with it. It's like a corporation. You just get rid of the guy on top, put in a new guy, and problem supposedly goes. John the 23rd, who becomes, as I said, Pope in 58, he is very committed to changing the Vatican's attitude toward the Jews, and he convenes a Second Vatican Council. There's a lot that goes into Second Vatican Council, which culminates in 65. The one thing we're interested in, which is the most provocative part of the Second Vatican Council, is the part that everyone's familiar with, is a document called In Our Time, Nostra Aetate. And it's specifically the fourth section of that document that addresses the Jews. In every way, it's very positive, meaning it does not say the Jews, we don't believe in replacement theology. It does not go that far. It goes as far as it can go without subverting what the church fathers said. So it doesn't say the Jews are now the chosen, but refers to the Jews are our elder brother. It removes from the liturgy that was, for instance, the Good Friday liturgy. So we call it Good Friday. That's the day that Christians celebrate Jesus or remember Jesus' crucifixion date. But that was a very bad day for Jews. Good Friday, Jews didn't come out, and very often in churches throughout Christendom, a Jew is brought into the church and smacked in the face as part of the liturgical ceremony of Good Friday. There are stories of Jews that were hit so hard that they died right there in the middle of the service, okay? The Jews were called treacherous or perfidious Jews. So what John the 23rd seeks to do is to extract all of that, remove all the liturgy that's anti-Jewish, and say that the Jews today are not responsible for Jesus' crucifixion. It's true, it says that Jewish leaders at that time were responsible, but it has nothing to do with Jews today. So in every way, it's positive. It's not like Christian Zionism. In fact, the Vatican at the time did not have diplomatic relations with Israel, and it did not it did not ignite that. That's going to happen later in 1993 for reasons that are not germane to this conversation. Well, this causes the Second Vatican Council. At the time, the Arab world went nuts, went cuckoo. So you had, as you can imagine, 1964, 1965, Egypt, Syria, all these countries said, don't you dare, come out with this thing. But John the 23rd went with it anyway, and it was completed in 1965. He dies shortly before it, but it comes out, and it has a very big impact on the Roman Catholic Church. And today, there are many, 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 many Roman Catholics that have a very different view of the Jews because of this document. But as you can imagine, it stirs a revolution. I'm not going to go into all the different kinds of groups, but within the Catholic Church, there are many groups that want no part of this. Some groups, the most extreme groups, are the Sedevacantists. These are groups that say we don't even accept John the 23rd as Pope. We don't accept any Pope since John the 23rd. So that's one group. That means the seat is empty. So you have these come in different flavors, but they're all sorts of Catholic, and these are called radical traditionalist Roman Catholics that want nothing to do with a new kind of liturgy in the church. They rather want the older pre-Vatican II Latin liturgy. One caveat that's important: there are some Roman Catholics that want and prefer and do use pre-Vatican II Latin liturgy in the church, but are not anti-Israel, anti-Jewish. They just want the more, let's just call it the more authentic Latin. There are them, but they support Vatican II and are not anti-Israel. There are, so I don't want you to mix that up. But the big guys who are for the Latin pre-Vatican II liturgy, some of them are viciously anti-Jewish, real supersessionists, hard supersessionists, hate Israel insane. Candace Owens' husband is in that universe. It's not an accident that he speaks for the CIC, the Christian Identity Conference, Michael Matt. This is a whole spin of people. There are different groups. So some of them are SSPX Catholics. So they're not Sedevacantists, but Now, just a point about SSPX, which means the Society of St. Pius X. This is very important for you to know. So this group is invariably very anti-Israel, but you can't join them. So you're going to hear Catholics going, I'm not a member of SSPX. I'm not... I don't belong to it. I think it's a group that was created in 1970 by Swiss bishops. They were ultimately put in, disfellowed by, I think, John Paul II. They were kind of restored to an irregular relationship by Pope Benedict XVI. It's not, from our vantage point, it's not really germane. It's not really relevant. But the key is, why is it called Society of St. Pius X? It's because of what occurred on January 25th, 1905, when Theodore Herzl, for the first time and last time in his life, is going to stand in front of Pope Pius X, and he's going to ask him, foolishly, a fool's errand, ask him to recognize Israel as a state, support a Jewish state. I don't know what was going through his mind. Pius X said, you didn't recognize our Lord, which was a huge mistake. We're not recognizing your state. While we can't prevent Jews from coming to Palestine, you could be sure our priests will be waiting for you in Palestine to baptize the Jews as you come there. So he was an anti-modernist pope. He was a pope that was trying to keep... I'm not going to go through the history, but there was a time when different Christian denominations were trying to modernize themselves, and he was pushing against that movement hard and strong. So he's a champion of the hardcore anti-Vatican II people. So there's all these... So you can't technically join SSPX unless you're a Roman Catholic priest. I think there are only 700 of them, but all these groups, which you talked about, the CIC, SSPX, Sedevacantists, it's just one big mixture. There are other groups like that who reject the Second Vatican Council, and they reject it because of what it said about the Jews. Okay, so and unfortunately, what happened with Candace Owens, as an example, it was a perfect storm for her. She had unfortunately, a very strong relationship with Kanye West. That's not a world I'm familiar with. His music, I'm familiar with it, but he was an insane anti-Semite. He's clearly mentally ill, and my heart goes out to him for that reason. He's clearly bipolar. And she had a very strong, and he's in, again, I couldn't name one song he sings, and it's not the kind of music that I would enjoy. But I know he's out there as you did, and he just does the most outrageous things in the world. He's, was close to Nick Fuentes, close to Candace. So Candace gets drawn into his world. Candace Owens, although when she marries George Farmer, who grew up Anglican and grew up pro-Israel, as his father is. George Farmer, his dad is an Anglican, but not any kind of Anglican. He's a conservative Anglican evangelical Christian who's very pro-Israel. So this is very critical. This is what's happening here. So Michael Farmer, the dad, who is a lord in England, which is an extremely prominent person. The Farmer family is just of the elite in British aristocracy. George, the son, rejects his father's pro-Israel evangelical Anglican Christianity and instead becomes an ultra-traditionalist Roman Catholic. In the words of Candace, she said, there's no one more Catholic than her husband. So when she married George, she was a reformed, she believed in reformed theology, and she was very pro-Israel. She worked with PragerU, and she had a strong relationship with Dennis Prager. God help him, he should have a complete recovery. She was very pro-Jewish. But George increased, so there's a storm going on where George Farmer is becoming increasingly more radically traditional, like the Marshall Taylor type of Roman Catholicism, which rejects Second Vatican Council, which is friendly to SSPX. Again, a lot of these guys are going to go, I don't belong to SSPX. Well, that's a misnomer. You can't belong to SSPX. You can just be friendly to these kinds of groups, okay? So be careful, because there's kind of a smoke and mirrors going on. All these guys in the CIC, the Michael Matt, that whole spin, they all hate Israel. They hate the Second Vatican Council. Now, to them, to these Roman Catholics who are in different groups, who are very anti-Israel, very anti-Second Vatican Council, to them there's a very big difference between being a sedevacantist, being SSPX, or being affiliated with all kind, the Remnant. All these are all different Catholic groups, and there are differences as far as they're concerned. There's a very big difference between them. There's a very big difference if their Eucharist matters, if their sacraments matters, but to non-Catholics, it's all the same thing. You get that part? So to them, there's a big difference. To us, it doesn't matter. From the outside looking in, these are all people that reject the Second Vatican Council. Do they reject John the 23rd? Well, yes, John the 23rd, that's not germane to us. To them, there's a very big difference. And it actually has not just theological differences, but real practical applications. Could a SSPX priest perform one of the sacraments? Well, it depends. And even today, it's an irregular relationship with the Vatican, for reasons that are beyond the scope of this. So what happens is a perfect storm. Candace Owens adopts the radical Catholic, rejecting Second Vatican Council of her husband, George Farmer. And it's so interesting that she believed in Reformed theology prior to that. Why is that interesting? Because Reformed theology is umbilically, I'm not going to what it means, but it's umbilically connected to to John Calvin. John Calvin was the second generation of Protestant reformers, which means he was more Protestant than Luther was. Why is not germane. It'll be just too much information. But Calvin was more in practice, not in his hatred of the Pope, but in terms of his practice of being a Protestant. So he rejected more Roman Catholicism sacraments than did Luther. Luther is older than him. John Calvin was born, Luther was 26 years old. As an example, the Eucharist. So Lutherans consider the Eucharist to have a real presence, like there's something going on there. It's not transubstantiation, but it's higher, okay? It's higher than what a Baptist might consider today. Calvin said it's just absolutely, it's symbolic and that's it. The view of Mary, as far as Lutherans go, is high. It's not, she's worthy of veneration and but she is in a higher rank. There's all kinds of reasons I'm not going into, but Calvin is more Protestant, not in his anti-Catholic rhetoric, they're both the same, but in his rejecting more and more of the Roman Catholic sacraments and saying they are just absolutely nothing, which is essentially his view is the one that is adopted by the many Protestants that you're familiar with, okay? So that's where the replacement theology is exploding, and unfortunately, it is triggered by October 7th, because October 7th essentially destroys a narrative. It destroys a narrative the Jews are evil. This is what the mystery is, like what happened October 7th. So what happened October 7th is the clearest case possible. Here you had thousands of terrorists from Gaza coming and attacking who? They didn't attack like right-wing nationalist Israelis like that. No, they attacked, not all, but they attacked Israelis that were, many of the kibbutzim they lived in were fairly left-wing, so-called progressive that helped Palestinians out in Gaza, would take them to the hospital, get them medical care in Israel, made sure that Gazans who came into Israel could work for them. I think somewhere in the order of about 20,000 Gazans came into Israel under a program that had been established, but they were actually using that opportunity to come into Israel from the Gaza Strip to map out where everything was so that October 7th, I mean, it's just mind-blowing. So you took the of the 1,200 Jews that were murdered on that horrible Sunday morning, which was a Shabbat, it was a Simchas Torah, a very significant number of them were liberal, who would be considered part of the left of center. These are like not the right, these are not, would not be the conservative. And a lot of people changed their views because of what occurred. So it was so plain. I mean, all right, I don't want to go off topic. So the key is that this event that occurred so blew up any narrative that Israel was somehow an occupier. It like this was like the most innocent people that had nothing to do with anything. You know, they were the ones predominantly, it's not exclusively, that were murdered on that day. 251 Israelis were taken hostage. It's a trigger. Now, there are many other things that occurs, but Candace Owens adopts the Roman Catholic Church, but not Marco Rubio's Roman Catholic Church, not House Speaker Newt Gingrich's Catholic Church, but rather the Catholicism of her husband. So this fuels her virulent anti-Semitism. There are other things that went on at the time. These are not the only two things. There were some people that said things, that did things in a way that probably could have been said differently. She made some statements that really didn't have to be said. And she talked about things that she really knew little about. Hitler, his isolationism, this was not her field of expertise, but she's an excellent communicator. So she went from being very pro-Jewish, very pro-Israel, to being just just flat out hard replacement theology. Nick Fuentes is mind-blowing in that he's Catholic. He's totally, rejects Second Vatican Council. He's not a stupid idiot, by the way. He is not a Christian scholar, and Candace Owens is not a New Testament. None of them are theologians or have broad knowledge of it. But Fuentes is reading stuff. I mean, he's not pulling stuff out of nowhere. He has some knowledge. He's a hardcore racist. He's a hardcore anti-Semite. He says things that none of us heard except from the Klan. His racial views, his white Christian nationalism. It's not like it never existed before, but that was considered fringe. And Tucker Carlson has been very damaging in that he has interviewed these people and given them soft puff interviews, laundered them and made them mainstream. And he's probably the most dangerous of all. He has the credibility. He's a very skilled communicator. So he has laundered these views, made them part of the mainstream. And the impact it has had on the Republican Party cannot be overstated. The conservative Republican Party, which used to be stalwart pro-Israel, is now completely split because Tucker Carlson is no longer working for Fox. He's free to, do whatever he wants. Does he take money from Qatar? It doesn't matter. Qatar is not giving me money. That's what's key. So that's what's happening. It's not like this is an anomaly. This is the way Christianity was. One other point should be mentioned. 19th century, where does Christian Zionism then come from? It doesn't come from Lutheran Calvinism, but it comes from John Nelson Darby, a dispensationalist of the 19th century who comes to the United States with a new gospel, a new theology, a new view. He says the churches had it wrong all along, but rather the Jewish people are chosen. Replacement theology is wrong. The Jews still have a covenant with God. This is very critical. And he has good basis for this in the New Testament, because if you read all of Romans chapter 11, you see that when you come to the end of Romans 11, where the churches where the replacement theology folks are taking this from, Romans 9, 10, 11. But Romans 11 ends that ultimately the promises made to Israel are irrevocable. This is very critical. Read Romans 11, but verse 25, 26, but most importantly, 28 and 29. Because that was... Paul is chameleon. You got to get that straight. He's speaking out of every side of his mouth. To the Jew, he's like a Jew. To those who are not Jewish, he becomes like someone who's not Jewish. 1 Corinthians 9, 20 through 22. I know there's a lot here, and I'm unpacking this very quickly, but Paul is all over the place, especially in Romans. Why in Romans? Because he's writing to a church that he's not attended yet. He will come to Rome, but he's not there yet. So he's all over the place on the Jews. It's the least anti-Jewish of his letters. So Darby is now bringing the idea that the Jews are chosen. Now, Darby does not mean that Jews go to heaven, even if they don't believe in Jesus. Okay, this is very critical. Darby and those that follow him, Cyrus Scofield, Moody, all these people who are dispensationalists, they don't think that the Jews go to heaven if they don't believe in Jesus. But they believe on earth there are two covenants. I'll retract that. God has two covenants. One covenant is with the Jews. It's a physical, earthly covenant, and that is the Jews are blessed by God, and that Israel belongs to the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people, and if you bless the Jews, which is in Tanakh, God will bless you. Look, there are in Tanakh explicit references to the Jews returning to the land of Israel at the end of days. If you've never read Ezekiel 36, it's all you have to do. You don't need a commentary. You don't need anything. You don't need a thing, okay? If you sit down and go, okay, take a Christian Bible, by the way. Take the NIV. It doesn't matter. If you read Ezekiel 36, 37, it's just not possible to believe in replacement theology. I'm just giving it straight away. The Jews, because it's not... Ezekiel is not trying to portray the Jews as never doing anything wrong. But it says, at the end, the Jews are returning. I'm going to give them a new heart, a heart of flesh, not of stone. They're going to keep my Torah. And this is Ezekiel 34, 35, 36, 37, 38. You can read all this. It's all the same thing. The Jews will keep my Torah. They'll return back to the land, and they'll never be exiled again. All you have to do is read Amos. Amos is not a book that was written during the same time of Isaiah. Amos is not a book that goes easy on the Jews. It's not like it's, but it ends. At the end, the Jews are going to return back to the land. I beg you, read Amos chapter 9, verse 14 and 15. That's all you have to do. I mean, if you're watching this, I don't care what you believe. Okay, if you read these, you read Jeremiah 30, verse 3. Okay, Jeremiah did not go easy on the Jews, but the nature of the prophets is criticism. We want to make you better, better, better. You're not doing enough. This is where you're messing up, but you are going to return. And once you are planted in the land, you can never be uprooted again. This is very important. I beg you to read it for yourself. I plead with you. If you are a Christian, whether you like me, you don't like, it doesn't matter. Just read these chapters for yourself. And these are not chapters that are designed to make Jews look good. There's a lot of criticism in Amos against the Jews and how they were behaving, a lot. But at the end, the Jews must return back to their land. It's a remnant. See Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 12 through 16 as an example. It's just clear as day that at the end of all this, the nation of Israel will rise up. Not all, a remnant will rise up. They will be restored back to the land. And once they are returned back to the land will give forth its fruit. The Jews will be, the children of Israel, the Jews, the physical descendants of the children of Israel, the Bnei Israel will return back to the land. They will be restored, the remnant will be restored. See Isaiah 43, verse 5 and 6. It's just so transparently clear. And what these Christians are doing is they're ignoring all this. And they're replacing it with Paul. And they're not reading Paul properly. That's what's really going on. But so the Christian Zion, I mean, the one thing the Christian Zionists got right is they're reading these passages correctly. Mike Huckabee is reading these passages correctly. It's not only Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. You have Numbers chapter 24, where it's clearly talking about the Jews, and Bilam is giving the promise of Mashiach, the restoration of the Jews are forever, and you bless Israel, God's going to bless you. So it's very clear in Tanakh. The problem is Christians are not reading the Hebrew Bible, and they're really reading the Christian screeds of the church, and the church all were replacement theology again. Now, just the last part is America would be an ideal environment where the teachings of Darby would take off like wildfire, because the founding fathers of the United States were very pro-Jewish, had a good place in their heart for Jews. George Washington had a good place in there. Hamilton's mother converted to Judaism. Hamilton was trained in Hebrew school. He was not the only, but a very important contributing author to the Constitution. He was an absolute genius. I mean, he was very, very, very pro-Jewish. The founding fathers, so the United States also hated Britain, as you can imagine. You know, they did not like King George III. So as you can imagine, Darby's ideas which are much more elaborate than what I've described. I didn't describe what dispensationalism means. It's not germane. I didn't describe what premillennial means. Not germane. The key part is there are two covenants God has with the physical Israel, which cannot be broken, but it's an earthly covenant. And then God has a spiritual covenant with the church, and that's a covenant that all Christians go to heaven. So it's not like Darby thought that Jews who don't believe in Jesus go to heaven. That's not the case. Okay, but he did believe in that two covenant. That's not the same as dual covenant theology. And that's what Christian Zionism comes from. And this is what Charlie Kirk believed. He was a dispensationalist through and through. He was an extraordinary defender of not just Israel, but the Jews and even Jewish literature and Talmud. He was just a remarkable philo-Semite. And tragically, he was murdered, and there is a fight. There's a war going on right now for the future of Turning Point, which is the most important organization in the conservative American political spectrum. And there's an absolute battle for the soul of that organization right now. And that's why you're seeing this battle playing out, because really what's happening is the battle is for 2028, and where is the conservative Republican Party? After all, the conservative evangelical vote is the largest voting bloc in the United States. About 1 in 5 Americans belong to it. So there's a war going on, not with Trump. The war that's going on right now is where is the heart and soul going to be of the Republican Party in 2028? That's the long and short of what's happening right now. If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נעשה בחפצו כל